In today's world of information technology and programming, as well as just computing in general, there are more resources and applications that we could ever dream of to make our future projects easier, in some cases, even more streamlined. For a long time, I've always wanted to make games, and it's something that I've already done, but I've been lucky to have access to easier methods of making said games, and in retrospect, a lot more work could have been done on them. Regardless, it was something I wanted to do anyways, and I still want to do more in the future with engines that I've personally picked to do the job. One such engine that has made a dream come true is the Easy FPS Editor. Not a lot of people know about this engine, especially when you already have the elephants in the room dominating the indie game scene. Even with Unity's pitfalls, it's still one of the most powerful engines out there for indie developers to use. Godot still has a long way to go, but it is the next best thing, and it's an engine that I want to use in the future as well. GDevelop has opened up possibilities that will enable me to experiment with 2D ideas in my head, whereas Godot will be more for 3D with possibly some 2D in the future. Easy FPS Editor, though, is a more specialized engine, made for those that are more into retro-inspired FPS games. Ever since the release of games like Doom 2016 and Dusk, we've seen a rise of retro-inspired FPS games harkening back to the days of classic Doom and Quake, two games and franchises that I have a place in my heart for. At this stage, we have a lot of these type of games, and we're no longer in a position to complain about there not being enough of them. This engine is made with classic Doom and Quake in mind, or Wolfenstein 3D if you want to go further back. It's a very easy engine to pick up, doesn't require any coding knowledge whatsoever unless you want to do more advanced scripting, a built-in controller so you can start playing your prototype immediately, and it also has a bunch of accessible tabs to modify your game on the spot. It's one of the best engines out there for beginners that want to make their own shooter, but don't want to spend an eternity watching tutorial videos just to make someone else's game. I myself have made 3 small FPS games using this engine, and all I really had to do was draw up my own sprites and find other textures and sounds to build up the visuals for said game without having to do much else. It's that easy. The engine was made by a user called Jessica Chan, who wanted to make an all-in-one engine that makes retro FPS development easy and accessible to anyone, regardless of their background. It has since been passed over to another user called Clark CG9516, who is continuing its development. It's not unlike what the game creators did back in the day with FPS Creator and Game Guru, where anyone could make a game. Me personally, I'm not big on programming. I realized this when game design appealed to me much more. I know that programming is a very important part of game development and is essential to making a more advanced type of game, but I just see it as a means to an end, whereas other aspects of game development and design excite me a lot more. This engine allows me to rapidly develop retro-inspired FPS games, harkening back to the days of said games like Wolfenstein 3D, Doom, or Quake, without having to build everything from scratch. When you open up the app, you'll be prompted to create a new project, and from that point on, the sky is the limit. Once you create a map, you're then presented with a number of features ranging from entities, decorations, skybox options, player and game configuration options, and pre-made assets for things like health, keys, and armor. You can either use your own textures or download other assets online and build the game on the fly. It already comes with a functional main menu, and starting a game is really quick. As I said, it comes already coded with a controller and you can crouch, jump, and move around. When you add enemies or weapons, you can set certain properties like hitboxes, damage, and health, as well as speed. It's a fairly customizable system without being too overwhelming for the user. If you're the creative type and want to make a retro shooter, this is the perfect engine to brainstorm ideas. Mapping is also really easy. You just use walls and floors on the grid to design your layout, and you can test it without having to build the game to see immediate results. And speaking of building, you can build and package the game straight away, and once you do that, you can then publish it on other websites like itch.io. People that want more flexibility may have to tinker more on the scripting side of things though, but what's already there is good enough for a beginner that wants to make their own starting shooter, really. Not a lot of games have been made for it because it's not as well known, but what's already there so far has been pretty impressive, and I feel like it's only really just gotten started. I had an email sent to me by DOSman Games, including a key freeze game called Flash of the Blade X, using Easy FPS Editor. I did a quick playthrough of the game and really enjoyed it. The feudal Japan setting is something I really like, and having it wrapped into a retro FPS experience made it a fun time for me. There is also a classic version of the game that I'll put in the description, but I would recommend the remastered version if you had to pick the one. And since it's only a couple of bucks, there's no harm in giving the game a crack, especially if you have an Ice Fiend mentality towards boomer shooter experiences and want another fix, and like Japanese settings like I do. There are some other projects too made by other people in the Easy FPS Editor community, like Evil Plush 3D by Crow Hill Studios, The Interval by Sean Noonan, and Kill Will by X-Scorn Games. A lot of these games are structurally similar in terms of how they play, because the controller that's been built in the engine already provides a template for your game that you can then use for rapid development. One of the secrets of game development is that you don't need to make everything yourself. Most developers, especially solo developers, will actively seek out resources, assets, or templates online to hasten the development process of the game. This engine enables a lot of users to get going straight away, and for those that want to take things even further, you can also import 3D models into the game. It's a bit trickier though compared to just importing 2D sprites, because the engine uses the MD3 format, which was used for Quake 3, so it's pretty old and not many people use that format anymore, which means you would need to use software that supports the MD3 format, even if it means using an older version of Blender. It would be nice to see more up-to-date formats be supported if possible though, so that more polygonal-based projects can be achieved without rolling back to older software or converting new formats to old formats like MD3. But if you can get past that barrier, then you can make Quake 1-like projects with this engine, with fully 3D environments and models. For newcomers to the engine, it comes with a manual of its own, and it's pretty accessible to read, but I'll also add a link in the description on how to fully use the engine so that you can get started. I'll also provide some placeholder assets too so that you can use it to test out your first project and get a feel for how the engine works. Easy FPS Editor is one of the most underrated engines out there on the market, offering a game guru-centric experience that's accessible to any type of person that has an interest in game development. We see all kinds of projects nowadays, and there's really no right or wrong as to what engine or framework you use to develop your game. Just use the tool that works best for you. No need to complicate it, since this engine already does a lot of the heavy lifting for you. You don't even have to make a shooter if you don't want to. You can even scale down the project to just being a 3D platformer if you wanted to, since there's already a controller in place. And you can use scripting to add in other elements too, especially for those that want a more narrative-driven experience for their project. For what you get out of it, it's a steal. And while GZ Doom is a more capable engine and is another fantastic choice for retro-inspired game makers, this is honestly a much easier starting point for beginners that want to make their own boomer shooter or retro-inspired shooter like Wolfenstein or Doom. Play around with the engine and see if it clicks with you. I myself plan on doing more projects with it and may showcase one if it's good enough. Easy FPS Editor is a great beginner game engine. Give it a spin and see how it goes.